The Umbral Frequency. The transmission had been broadcasting for 17 hours when Tifa Lockhart first heard the whispers. She stood in the abandoned radio tower on Sector 7's eastern rim, her breath forming crystalline clouds in the sub-zero air that had inexplicably settled over Midgar 3 days prior. The temperature drop wasn't natural. Nothing had been natural since the Heisenberg Group's experiments began 6 months ago. Now their rogue faction had vanished entirely, leaving behind only the endless hypnotic signal that pulsed through every frequency on the electromagnetic spectrum. "Cloud, are you receiving this?" Tifa spoke into her headset. But only static answered. The signal was getting stronger, drowning out all other communications. She adjusted the ancient dials on the radio equipment, wincing as feedback shrieked through her earpiece. That's when she heard it, barely audible beneath the electronic noise, like voices speaking underwater. Words in a language that shouldn't exist, yet somehow felt familiar in the deepest recesses of her mind. "Come to us, Tifa Lockhart. We have been waiting." Her blood turned to ice. The voice had spoken her name. The radio tower's emergency lighting flickered, casting writhing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Tifa's martial artist instincts kicked in as she detected movement in her peripheral vision. Shapes that dissolved when she turned to look directly at them. "I know you're there," she called out, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Show yourselves." The whispers multiplied, overlapping into a chorus of dead voices. The temperature plummeted further, and frost began forming on the metal surfaces around her. Then, through the static-filled air came the sound of footsteps, too many footsteps, coming from every direction at once. Dr. Helena Voss emerged from the shadows first, her once pristine lab coat now tattered and stained with substances that gleamed wetly in the dim light. Behind her came the other members of the Heisenberg Group, their faces pale and wrong, eyes reflecting light like mirrors. "Tifa," Dr. Voss said, her voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for human vocal cords. "You received our invitation." "What have you done to yourselves?" Tifa demanded, settling into a fighting stance. The scientists moved with an unsettling synchronization, their heads tilting at identical angles as they regarded her. "We have transcended," said Dr. Marcus Crow, the group's former leader. His words seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously. "The Umbral Frequency opened doorways we never imagined possible. We have seen what lies beyond the veil of reality." Tifa noticed the devices they carried, crystalline structures that pulsed with the same rhythm as the transmission. The artifacts hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than human perception could process. "You've been broadcasting that signal for days," Tifa said, fighting the urge to look away from their unnatural faces. "People are getting sick. Children are having nightmares about things that don't exist." "Don't exist," Dr. Voss laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Everything exists, Tifa, every nightmare, every terror, every whispered fear in the dark. The Umbral Frequency simply adjusts the barriers between what is and what could be." The crystalline devices began to glow brighter, and Tifa felt something pressing against the edges of her consciousness. Alien thoughts trying to worm their way into her mind. She gritted her teeth and pushed back, her willpower fortified by years of mental discipline. "We made contact 3 months ago," Dr. Crow continued, his eyes now completely white. "The entities beyond the frequency, they showed us truth. Reality is so much more fragile than we believed. A few adjustments here, a slight alteration there, and the impossible becomes inevitable." "You're talking madness," Tifa said, but even as she spoke she could see the air around the scientists beginning to shimmer and distort. Geometric patterns that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space began manifesting around them. "Are we?" Dr. Voss stepped closer, and Tifa could see that her shadow was moving independently, reaching toward Tifa with tendrils of pure darkness. "Look around you, dear. Look at what your reality has become." Tifa risked a glance at the radio equipment. The dials were spinning wildly now, and the metal itself was beginning to twist into impossible configurations. The very structure of the tower was changing, walls bending inward at angles that defied geometry. "The entities promised us knowledge," Dr. Crow said. "They showed us how to reshape matter itself, how to edit the fundamental constants of existence. All they asked in return was access. Access to what? To your world, to your dimension, to the billions of minds that have never experienced true fear." The crystalline devices reached a crescendo of light, and suddenly the air filled with things that had no names. Tifa caught glimpses of tentacles that might have been shadows, of eyes that were also doorways, of teeth that grew like flowers from empty space. The radio tower was no longer a radio tower. It was something else entirely, something that existed in the spaces between thoughts, "We are the Harbingers," Dr. Voss whispered, her form beginning to blur and split into multiple overlapping versions of herself. "We prepare the way. Soon the Umbral Frequency will reach critical resonance. And then what?" Tifa demanded, raising her fists as the impossible architecture continued to shift around her. "Then your reality will remember all the things it tried so hard to forget." The attack came from everywhere at once. The twisted scientists moved with inhuman speed, their bodies stretching and contorting as they lunged at her. But Tifa had trained for the impossible her entire life. She ducked under Dr. Voss's grasping hands that had grown too many fingers, and drove her fist into the woman's solar plexus. The impact sent shockwaves through the distorted space, and Dr. Voss screamed in harmonics that shattered what remained of the radio equipment. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, hissing where it hit the floor. "You cannot stop what has already begun," Dr. Crow shrieked, his voice now coming from multiple mouths that had opened across his face. "The transmission has been received. The doors are opening." Tifa spun and kicked, her boot connecting with one of the crystalline devices. The artifact cracked, and immediately the geometric distortions began to flicker and stabilize. She pressed her advantage, fighting through the swarm of transformed scientists to reach the remaining devices. "The frequency must complete its cycle." Dr. Voss lunged at her again. But her form was becoming increasingly unstable. "They are coming through, they must come through." "Not today," Tifa snarled, grabbing another crystal device and crushing it between her hands. The razor-sharp edges cut deep, but she held on until it shattered completely. The effect was immediate. The writhing shadows retreated, the impossible angles snapped back to normal geometry, and the temperature began to rise. But the scientists, or what they had become, were not finished. "You understand nothing." Dr. Crow's voice was becoming distorted, as if he were speaking from very far away. "We are already dead. We died the moment we first heard their whispers. This is just an echo." As he spoke, his form began to fade, becoming translucent. The others were dissolving as well, their bodies losing cohesion as the crystalline devices failed. "The transmission will resume," Dr. Voss whispered as she became little more than a voice in the static. "Others will take up our work. The entities are patient. They have waited eons for this opportunity. They can wait a little longer." The last device shattered in Tifa's grip, and suddenly she was alone in the radio tower. The equipment was destroyed, the temperature was returning to normal, and the only sound was the wind howling through the broken windows. But in the sudden silence she could still hear them, faint whispers just at the edge of perception, speaking in that impossible language that her mind seemed to understand despite itself. "This is not over, Tifa Lockhart. We have marked you now. We know your frequency." She shivered and activated her emergency beacon, calling for extraction. As she waited for rescue, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the static between radio stations, the Umbral Frequency was still broadcasting, still calling to anyone who might be listening, still opening doors that should have remained forever closed. 3 hours later, when the rescue team arrived, they found Tifa sitting alone in the ruins of the radio tower. The official report would state that the Heisenberg Group had been conducting unauthorized experiments with experimental broadcast technology, resulting in their deaths due to equipment malfunction. But that night, as Tifa lay in her bed trying to sleep, she could hear whispers in the static of her radio alarm clock, and in the darkness behind her eyelids she could see doors, countless doors stretching into infinity. Most of them were still closed, but some, she realized with growing horror, were beginning to crack open. The Umbral Frequency had found its first permanent receiver, and Tifa Lockhart would never again know true silence. In the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, in the moment before sleep took hold, she would hear them calling, waiting, planning their return. The entities beyond the frequency were patient after all. They had all the time in the world.